All right, back here talking the return of the NBA on the Just End the Suffering podcast. Joining me today, one of FanSided's top NBA people, Ian Levy's back on the podcast. Ian, welcome. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on.
Not a problem. Great to have you on. And obviously, the big news of the week in the sports world, the NBA is back. 22 teams going down to Orlando to finish the regular season, 8 more games, playoffs going through October 12th, Game 7 of the NBA Finals. What's your big takeaway on this whole plan they came up with?
I think it's the league was sort of in an impossible decision. I think they, there was a lot of issues at play, a lot of pieces to work through, and I think they think they did the best they could. There's issues with this plan. I think there were issues with the alternatives or the other variations that they looked at too. I don't think there was a perfect scenario. So. I'm happy to hear that there's a plan in place. I'm happy to hear there's a framework we're going to sort of be marching towards, and I'm just hoping everything works out. Everybody can stay safe and healthy, and it actually works.
Yeah, the number was confusing at first. I was 22. Do you think a lot of it was due to the NBA wants to bring teams like the Pelicans and the Trailblazers in to generate more attention to this thing? Because I felt like logically it would have made sense, just go right to the playoffs, but they are not doing that.
Yeah, I think the concern there was about wanting to give teams some sort of competitive games before the playoffs start, not wanting to jump immediately to the playoffs in terms of what they'd have to sacrifice in quality of play, even with people sort of having the brief training camp that they're going to get, having them come back in without any game action. Maybe you get some pretty sloppy games at the beginning of the season. And so, I think they wanted to address that. And once you're going to address that, it's sort of a slippery slope. Then, you might as well give teams a chance to play their way into the playoffs if you're going to have to revive the regular season to some degree. And then you've got teams that don't want to come back for the regular season because they have nothing to play for. There's no point in them risking injury and risking exposure or whatever. So I think where they landed on 22, seems like a good idea. And I think obviously the pathway there was they decided, they probably started with the number of regular season games they wanted to play. They felt like 8 was, sort of the right number to give everybody a time to ramp up and feel like it wouldn't stretch the calendar out too much. And then from there, my guess is they backtracked and said, all right, if you're going to have 8 regular season games, here are the teams that can sort of plausibly make their way in that number of games.
Yeah, that does make some sense. And I know it's kind of a big question, but can you give me a little bit of an overview, kind of where we were at the pause? Who were the top dogs here? Who looked like they were in good shape to make a deep run in the NBA playoffs?
Yeah, I mean, Milwaukee was sort of head and shoulders above everybody else. I think they clearly looked like the best team in the league, even though their record, I can't remember exactly, but I think they're only maybe a game or two ahead of Los Angeles in the standings. Their point differential was almost twice that of the Lakers. So I think Milwaukee was the clear favorite. I think you'd look at the Western Conference, you'd have to consider the Lakers a really strong contender. The Clippers as well, have sort of been right there, and they've also played most of the season without their full complement of players. Kawhi Leonard has took some games off for load management. Paul George was coming back from an injury at the beginning. Lou Williams missed some games. I think you envision sort of that team at full strength, being at least as good as the Lakers and ready to challenge Milwaukee. And then you kind of have the dark horse teams. Houston, they're still kind of an unknown, still kind of an experiment. I can't remember what it was. Maybe they had 8 games after the trade deadline with Robert Covington at center and that new style they were going to try and play. So they're kind of a wild card. The Celtics too, I think, are a really interesting team. Have the pieces in theory, but they're relying a lot on their young players. And also Houston, they're looking at a playoff rotation that's probably really thin at center and maybe playing a lot of small ball.
Yeah, definitely some interesting stuff there. And obviously this is an unprecedented playoffs because we have the 3-month break between the end of the season, between basically the end of the regular season, the pick up of the regular season, and that's on. Do you think there are certain teams that will benefit from this break or something that might get hurt by it more?
Yeah, well, I know, the ability to get healthy is a big deal for some teams. Ben Simmons had that ailing back injury when the season ended. And so the chance to get him healthy, I think if things had sort of progressed at the normal pace, there was a chance that Simmons might have missed, a first round playoff series, potentially even two. Now he should be back in the lineup and healthy is my understanding. The Pacers too, were kind of nicked up. So I think it's kind of those mid-tier teams that are going to have their full complement of players back. I don't know about who gets hurt by it, who gets hurt by the layoff. It seems like it would sort of be pretty evenly distributed. You think about the negative consequences of this. The sort of disruption to chemistry and rhythm. It seems like that would, affect everybody kind of the same. So yeah, I don't know too much about that side.
Yeah, one thing I'm curious about watching this whole experiment play out in Disney is the whole idea is like a lot of these players are in their routines of, morning shoot around, like hang out for a couple hours, play at 7:00 your time, 7:30 your time, then go home. Because they only have 2-3 courts available. You're playing games throughout the day. People will be playing at different times. I feel it's going to be interesting to see how the players adapt to those circumstances.
Yeah, it is going to be a totally different experiment. I think it's, the implication is that at least for the regular season portion, there's going to be something like 4 or 5 games. I think what I've read is that there's going to be 2 arenas where they'll be playing games, but even at that level, 4 to 5, you're going to have at least some day games, and so I think it's going to be sort of more of a summer league atmosphere, especially with, the gyms either sort of completely empty or mostly empty. It's going to be interesting to see how they adjust their routines, their schedules, and then how that sort of connects to intensity level and things like that.
Yeah, I'm also intrigued because I've been reading some places online, ESPN had an article recently about how the league is thinking about doing things to try and give the higher seeds some kind of advantage. Obviously not going to have home court. Some things like flying the floors down from their buildings to put it in the gym. They're talking about maybe giving them one player who can get an extra foul a game. Like, do you think they're going to try and do anything to help these higher seeds out and kind of say, tough luck, this is what it is?
I think in the end, they probably won't do anything like that. It just seems absurd. I think it just I don't know. Nothing about it seems sort of realistic. Like actually sort of altering the fundamental rules of the game, something like giving somebody an extra foul, just seems a little bit too far for me. And I understand that, teams played for some sort of advantage that is now no longer there. But, there's already going to be so many asterisks on what happens. They're already sort of sacrificing so much. It's going to be so different that, trying to recover that home court advantage, piece for teams just seems like more trouble than it's worth.
I'm glad you brought the asterisk angle up there because this is another thing I want to consider here. It's a scenario I don't think the NBA has addressed very well. Obviously, they're going to be doing daily testing. They're going to be checking the players all the time. Like, what happens if we get to the playoffs and say a big star player like a LeBron or a Giannis Antetokounmpo tests positive, they're out, their team goes out. Like, how big an asterisk is put on the whole thing if something like that happens?
I don't think that's going to be the issue as much. I mean, that stuff happens anyway. Kevin Durant got hurt last year in the playoffs. DeMarcus Cousins got hurt last year in the playoffs. We had, Chris Paul's, bulky back or hamstring or whatever it was, maybe potentially cost the Rockets a chance at a title a couple of years ago. Those things happen anyway. The COVID-19 is the dynamic would be something different, but, I don't think that's really fundamentally any different than somebody tweaking a knee or, concussion or some other sort of injury that, also could have happened in the past. I think the whole thing is going to be treated as so separate and different anyway in the historical context that, something like that, a player testing positive and potentially sort of altering the outcome of the season, I think that's going to be less of a big deal than the fact that it's just, a fundamentally different thing to begin with.
Yeah, this whole thing is very different. It's also leading to a different NBA calendar. As I mentioned before, the NBA Finals is going to be end on October 12th. We have the draft and free agency a couple of days later. And we have basically, they're going to try and cram the entire offseason about a month and a half. I know the Player Association was a little surprised that date. Maybe it goes back towards Christmas. Like, how jam-packed? Did they actually fit all the stuff they normally do into like a two-month period? They got to cut some stuff down.
I think they'll have to cut some stuff down. I think, there's a couple elements. There's the physical recharge, like potentially whoever plays in the finals, if they, let's say the finals go all the way to Game 7, that last game would be October 12th, and then the season starts December 1st. So, those two teams in the finals could potentially have 6 weeks off between, winning the finals and the beginning of next season. And that's not a lot of time for sort of physical recovery, especially if they're going to, go right back into training camp. But I think there's also the mental recovery piece and the giving organizations a chance to breathe and sort of take a step back. And it's sort of a running joke. I know a few people who work for teams, and everybody for every team, the only time they're allowed to take vacation is in August, because it's the only month where there's nothing going on, there's nothing pressing, and so they work right up till summer league's over, and then it's like a ghost town. Everybody takes their vacations then, and so I think that effect could be felt on the entire organization, top to bottom, sort of not having a chance to breathe. And I don't think I was talking to my wife about that, and she was like, "Oh, well, it's just like they've had that chance now. The calendar's just shifted. They got that break a little bit earlier, and then everything's going to be crammed together." And I don't think this time really counts in the same way that a normal off season counts. So, yeah, I think things are going to be compressed. I think next year, I think it wouldn't surprise me if next year feels like a lockout season or something like that, where the quality of play is lower. Potentially there's a little more injury risk. We're obviously, teams are in a different place knowledge-wise than they were the last time there was a lockout. So maybe it's just a lot more load management as opposed to more injuries, and teams are more aggressive resting players and taking care of their health, knowing that there's sort of been a shorter recovery time. And then again, I think perhaps it's overblown, but you have to look at a team like the Warriors who they get the full benefit of this. They are not going to be playing in the playoffs. They are almost certainly, I would imagine, going to be in the playoffs next year because they are going to, they're going to be theoretically fully healthy. They're maybe going to have a top draft pick, or they're maybe going to be flipping that for somebody else. And so not having to come back to Orlando and participate, I think, is a huge win for the Warriors. And if you were going to look at somebody who sort of really comes out of this scenario with a leg up for next year, maybe it's a very small leg up, but I think the Warriors is the first team I would look at.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting. I didn't think about that. One other thing that's also been put out there is that sort of this idea that maybe this shift in the calendar this year, maybe it becomes a more permanent deal, because I know the NBA, it opens in October, everybody gets excited, then nobody really talks about the NBA again until closer to Christmas because it kind of gets buried by the NFL stretch run, stuff like that. Do you think this thing could lead the NBA consider maybe pushing their calendar back and starting in December and pushing the finals into July, sort of competing for that empty space that baseball seemingly occupies right now?
It's hard for me to imagine that, mostly just because of the financial sacrifice. I think this will force the league to evolve in some ways that, maybe try out something. I mean, we've already seen, they're trying some things, or at least considering some things that seemed like, unlikely possibilities a few years ago, but sort of have already been talked about, or always been talked about. But I think the dynamic that we knew for the last couple of years, that schedule, that structure, I think that was something that the league grew into or evolved towards over many years, in a way that maximized revenue for the teams and the league, maximized interest, with accommodations made for other things like player safety and health, and maximizing, the place in the culture or whatever. But the fundamental bottom line is that business, that money element. The league has lost so much money in the past, 6-8 months or whatever with the lockout. I think they're going to be, or not the lockout, the quarantine. I think they're going to be looking to recover as much of that as possible, and so I think they're going to try and get back to what has been the status quo as quickly as they can.
That's a good point. Not consider that element of it. And the last thing I want to ask you is, obviously, we do have basketball coming on the court, and assuming this goes off out of hitch, we're playing games in Orlando starting on July 31st. Which two teams do you think would be in the best shape to get to the NBA Finals?
I'm having a hard time wrapping my head, honestly, around the dynamics and what's going to be different and how, what's happened since middle of March changes things. So my default would be to go back to the teams that looked like the strongest in the regular season. I think the Bucks are head and shoulders above anybody else in the Eastern Conference. And in the West, I think it's the Lakers or the Clippers. I would, if I was a betting man, I'd be putting money on those teams.
Yeah, the one thing is definitely encouraging, though, if you're a basketball fan, is you might have wall-to-wall basketball for a solid 6 weeks with these games going all over. But it's definitely a lot of fun for the fan who's still trying to get used to this routine of not going out as much.
Yeah, I think that's going to be a fun piece that I'm certainly looking forward to. And between you and I, as somebody who lives on the East Coast, I am certainly not going to complain about all of the playoff games being played in the Eastern time zone. As somebody who the past couple of years is up till 2 or 3 a.m. Catching the Warriors playoff wins, I'm certainly not going to complain about things wrapping up a little bit earlier.
Yeah, that would be nice. Ian, thanks for all the time today. I really appreciate it. Before I let you go, how can people follow you on social media and keep up with the stuff you're working on over at FanSided?
I'm on Twitter at Hickory High, and you can also follow our entire NBA vertical at the Step Back.
All right, Ian. Thanks again. I really appreciate it.
Thanks a lot, Mike.
All right, and there you have it. That was Ian Levy talking about the NBA, talking about the return to play, some interesting things to consider there. Up next, we'll go into the logistics of the hub models for the NHL and the NBA with our legal correspondent, Phil Fraietta, right after this.